Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. Now in this episode I'm going to be looking at this box of bits which should end up being a Hornby West country that was sent in by Robert, who wants it repairing and DCC fitting if possible. So I'm going to empty all the bits out, make sure they're all here. I know there's a couple of bits that are damaged and all this wiring loom's all come apart. There's the base plate there with the pickups on, DCC decoder, and the tender. There's the motor. So all this is going to need testing before we put it back together. Just making sure there's nothing else in the box. The tender doesn't look too bad, it just looks a bit dirty. So I'll give this a clean up. Now, these Hornby West countries, as this one here, this was sent in by James, and I repaired this as well. This had a split gear problem, the same as the Plymouth I did. But these West countries are by far and away the most repaired model that I have ever done. I've done about 19 of these now. West countries or battles of Britain. They just seem to be prone to cracked axles or failing valve gear. So back to the model in question, I'm just going to refit the coupling onto the tender, and this needs a good clean. There's a lot of dust and there's something on this model. I'm not sure what it is. It may be it's just general dirt, I think. So I'll clean all this off with a cotton bud and warm water anyway. And then we're going to look at testing the motor. So I'm just going to get my battery with a couple of leads on it, because if the motor's dead there's no point, we'll have to buy a new one. But luckily the motor's spinning nice, so that's okay. The wiring loom and that is in the right mess. I may just get rid of this and hardwire this loco for DCC, because these wires from Hornby are thin. Many of them are broken and frayed, and it's going to be more of a hassle trying to sort them out than it is just to hardwire it. There's the idler gear. Luckily it's not split on this model, so that should be okay. There's the cylinder block, motor cover, gear cover, motor retainer. So I think most things are here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the chassis. I'm going to clean all the gunk and old lubrication off the wheel axles and in the axle casts in the chassis there. So using the cotton bud and mess, I'm just going to remove all of this old oil and grease. And while the wheels are out, I'm going to give them a thorough clean. Now these wheels were quite dirty, so I'm going to just scrape all that carbon deposits off there. And the wheels were polished up with my usual method of cotton bud and meths. And then fresh lubrication, everything's been cleaned off. So some Labelle 106 grease on the gear that's inside the chassis there. I have checked all the gears, none of them are cracked. I am running low on this Labelle stuff, I'm going to have to go and buy some more. A little bit of grease on there, and then I'm going to refit the wheels, making sure that they're the correct way up. Make sure that the axle box covers are going in the right way, and that all the bearings line up in the way they should. That rear wheel there needs some help. Now I am pleased that this model is one of those without that stupid, horrible springy rear axle. That is a pain in the backside. I really can't see any benefit that gives the model, other than it's just a pain in the ass to put it back together. But I'm pleased to see that this one doesn't have that. So when the wheels are all seated correctly, a small drop of oil on all the axles, because as you saw before, I cleaned it all off. So I'm going to make sure everything's correctly lubricated, and then I'm going to turn my attention to the pickup part. The wire is still attached, but there is a lot of old grease and grime all over this, so this needs a thorough cleaning. And the pickups will need bending back into position, because they are, some of them, the middle wheels especially, are really badly out of shape. So using my tweezer nose pliers, I'll bend this brass very carefully back into position. And I say very carefully because the brass that Hornby use is extremely thin and snaps very, very easily if you're not careful. But you can see there just how badly deformed that is. It's actually bending inwards instead of outwards towards the wheel. So some gentle manipulation should make that go back in the correct direction. And then the keeper plate is refitted. Now that wire goes up through a hole in the diecast chassis, and then I'm able to manipulate that round, making sure that the pickups are all sitting behind the wheels as they should be, and making sure that they make contact with the wheel backs, because now is the time to adjust them if they're not, while the model is in several pieces. But while I'm doing that, I'm just making sure that the pickups are touching the wheels, and when I'm satisfied that that's all in place, the base keeper plate, which luckily has all the screws still in it, is then replaced and screwed down to hold everything back into place. So that is a pretty big part of the model rebuilt. Those pickups are quite fiddly, as anybody who has taken one of these models apart will know. They are very fiddly to put back together. But these seem to have gone back with relative ease. So I screw that back down. Just tighten those up, nip the screws up a little bit, but do not over tighten them. And now that's the chassis and the wheels rebuilt. I'll just remove that, make sure those side rods there are in alignment. And another problem I found was that chassis base plate, the brake blocks were actually splayed outwards. The plastics have obviously been bent. So what I ended up doing was taking that base plate off again and just bending the brake blocks in slightly so they don't foul the side rods. So now we've rebuilt the chassis, it's time to look at the side rods. Now this part here is broken and has been re-glued, but it's not been glued back level and the glue snaps very easily. There we go. And it's actually missing a piece, it's too short. So I'm going to have to order a new set of slide valves for this model. So this is several days later. The new valve gear, the slide valves are here, and they sit underneath this metal weight, which used to house the DCC socket. So the wire comes to the side there in that channel that is purposely die cast in the weight, and then that is screwed back down to the chassis. And then the motor is refitted to the model. Now in hindsight, what I should have done was put the piston rods on those slide valves, but they came separate, so I decided to put them on afterwards, and that was actually quite hard to do. But anyway, the motor's refitted. I put some lubrication on the worm gear, and then the motor cover is screwed back into place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the motor mounting bracket. Now this is screwed in place, but this is screwed in place from the underside. Now if you ever take a model like this apart, I have seen people in the past undo this screw thinking it releases the body. It doesn't, it is just purely for the motor mounting bracket. So just line the screw up there and screw that down tight. And then with my battery and those battery leads, I am going to test the motor. But for some reason, I don't know why I did this, because I ended up taking this off again when fitting the valve gear, but I ended up putting the front bogie back on. I think my train of thinking when doing this was I was putting it all back together, making sure all the screws were there, because I was missing one and I had to order up a replacement. But now the front, it's starting to really look like a model again now. But as I said, here I am testing the motor to make sure the drivetrain works. All the wheels are turning freely, and the gears are now spreading that lubrication through the drivetrain. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look and try and amend this tender pickup. All the brass parts on this are severely bent as well. So the tweezer nose pliers are used just to put that back. And then this was screwed back into position with its associated spring. And it was that screw there that was missing. I needed a shouldered long screw to fit that pony truck. And then skipping ahead now, I've soldered the DCC decoder into place. You've seen me do this before. Orange and grey wires, as you can see, to the motor, and red and black to the track. I wasn't going to bore you by showing me some soldering for 20 minutes. But now that's done, I'm in a position to put the body shell back on. And this jigsaw puzzle of a West Country is almost back together. So you have to engage those two clips in the rear near the cab, and then the body sits down, and then the body securing screw is put in the front underneath that bogie, which is in the way now, as I said. Now the last thing to do is to rebuild the side rods and the valves. Now the washer goes on. The piston rods are now clipped into those slide valves, which was difficult to do with them on the model. I should have done that before. And then the crank pin is put back on and tightened up with my hex driver, and that is the West Country virtually rebuilt now. That was a very quick one considering how it arrived at me in that box in multiple pieces, although it did take over a week. I know the video is very short this week, but it did take over a week to rebuild this model because I had to wait for those parts to come through the post, the new slide valves and the new screw for the pony truck. But now that's all back together. I did the same on the other side. I'm just going to move that there because it come unclipped again. But now that's in place, I'm ready to test the model. Now these West Countries from Hornby, I really do like these models. They look the part and they can pull anything I put behind them. The problem is, though, they seem to be problematic. As I said, I've had 18 or 19 of these in for repair over the last several years. So here we see Robert's Wade Bridge now on the layout, outside again, even though it's November, the weather is quite mild. So it's a bit put through its paces before I ship it back off to Robert. If you've got anything you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look and get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. So it was a very quick one this week, but thanks again for watching Trash to Track. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.